All right, we're in the final installment of the Civil War lecture, and we're in the part of this time frame of Reconstruction, the post-war and what it looked like. And we had gotten up to the 15th Amendment. So let's get to it here. We were talking about the 15th Amendment. It was ratified. We're going to have Ulysses S. Grant be elected in 1868, I believe. During his time frame, the 15th Amendment was passed. It was passed in 1870 after his election. And the reason it was done after his election was that the radical Republicans saw that the Bourbonites, which is going to be the Southern conservative group we'll talk about here in just a second, were going to try to stop African Americans from voting. And so they passed the 15th Amendment, which just basically says you cannot deny someone the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Now, this is the amendment, but it's not going to be enforced for the better part of 100 years. And that Congress had the power to enforce this article. Again, we talked about this already. Women's right activist groups are going to be saying, wait a minute, you're giving slaves, people that had been property, the right to vote before you give women the right to vote. Women will not get suffrage until, suffrage is the meaning of the right to vote, until 1919. The failure of the federal courts to enforce the 15th Amendment and other actions, they pass a law in 1870 and 1871, the radical Republicans do, called the Enforcement Acts, and also known as the KKK Acts, and that was to curtail the KKK. The KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, came around in 1865, just the tail end, and they start to gain momentum as the Freedom Bureau, and that starts to give more and more freedom to blacks. This is done in part because of the Southern Democrat, the conservative Democrat called Bourbons. There's a whiskey called Bourbon, and they got nicknamed that. And they start to push back against the radical Republicans and their progressive agenda. And the Redeemers, which is another group of the Bourbons, start to push back in ways dealing with business, and really start to try to stop some of these policies. In 1875, underneath Ulysses S. Grant's administration, the Civil Rights Act is going to deny a crime that said anybody who denies full and equal access to places and to events and to the right to vote would be persecuted. It said that you could not prohibit somebody from being on a jury based off of their color. Again, these are all done through the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. The problem it had, though, was the Civil Rights Act did not have a strong enforcement mechanism in place, especially in the South. The people in the South just didn't pay attention to it. That's going to cause a whole bunch of friction. Again, stopping for a second and looking at what we have today. I'm not saying I am personally opposed to the people that are saying we're just going to, not pay attention and discount federal law when it comes to sanctuary cities. I agree that those other people have the right to have their opinion, but when you don't follow federal law and you simply pick and choose what laws you're going to follow, violence is going to come about from it, and there's going to be a whole bunch of separation, and that's what you've had with the South and the North. And it's probably going to happen again because you can't just not follow law. There will be no new Civil Rights Act from 1875 until 1964. And so you can look at it and say, did the radical Republicans get enough? Or did Lincoln and his idea for bringing the country back together, and Andrew Johnson's white supremacy and not believing that the blacks should be viewed as equal, did those things hurt us more? Or do you look and say, yes, those things were wrong and they were bad, and we probably should have acted more progressively against it, but we brought the Union back together. And so, yeah, it's always a what if. Ulysses S. Grant's administration. Ulysses S. Grant will come together, will come to get reelected in after Andrew Johnson's term for President Lincoln was done. He gets reelected. He gets elected because they didn't feel like Andrew Johnson could ever be elected for the Republican Party again, and he wins on a very large electoral college margin. I mean, he gets 73% of the vote in the electoral college, but as far as the popular vote, he only gets a few more than his Democratic opponent. And the reason he gets that and gets elected in some of these states is because of the minority vote. After that, that's when we passed the 15th Amendment and then the Enforcement Acts of 1877. Grant's administration, Ulysses S. Grant had been a military man. He had never been a politician. And he's going to have a lot of corruption and growth in his administration. He'd never served in public office before. You have a number of scandals that go on. The first one was the credit mobiler scandal, which was where the railroad companies were able to buy off certain people to make sure that they got the contract. And that was found out about, that these politicians were taking bribes underneath his administration. It wasn't directly tied to him, but it's in his administration. The next one was the whiskey ring. Again, this is an incident where you have distilleries. Distilleries make whiskey, and they were paying bureaucrats, politicians, money, and then money was making its way back into the Republican Party's savings account, and it looks poorly against Mr. Grant. The last one is the Indian ring. Indians now are being put on Indian reservations, and white companies are selling them products to the Indian reservation, and people want that contract. It's a lucrative contract, and they're paying off members of the Grant administration. So again, you have different scandals going on, nothing directly tied to him, but his ineptitude to know which way what was going on in his administration will definitely be a strike against him. One of the things that I do want to point out that is very good for him, though, is he's going to take a very staunch stand against the KKK. He's going to go after the people in the South. South Carolina is going to bring in federal troops against those guys. And he's going to come down hard against the organizers of the KKK. And he will arrest, he will imprison, he will put people out of jobs. He will destroy the KKK in a good portion of the South. And he does this because he identifies who these people are. A lot of these Ku Klux Klan members are prominent members in their town and in their society and in their state. And Grant's administration and President Grant says, I don't care. We're not going to have you do this. And they went in there and identified who they were and destroyed them. Again, the only way you win a war is identifying who your enemy is. If you can't identify who your enemy is, you can't fight against it. Was every white man a Ku Klux Klan member? No, they weren't. But the white people that were promoting racial hatred, they needed to be identified and they need to be taken out. And that's what Grant's administration does. You won't see the Ku Klux Klan make a rise again until the 1920s, early 1920s during the Industrial Revolution. Okay, we're going to stop there and get ready to take our test.